And that's one of the big problems, is that the same thing happens in the media. Everyone thinks we have a free press. We don't have a free press. We have a free press about things like the stain on the blue dress or something like that. Or other, Kardashian's wardrobe. But on anything really critical like this, we do not have a free press. And I can give you many, many, many examples. I'll only give you a couple. And this involves both the mainstream news media and another one that involves Hollywood. Take this and extrapolate it. Ira Rosen won his Emmy working with Mike Wallace at ABC News. He then became the executive producer, ABC News New York, for Primetime Live in 2020. When we started moving forward with the Disclosure Project, he came out to my farm in Virginia and came out with a production team. I gave him 35 hours of top secret testimony and countless top secret documents. And he says, either this is the biggest hoax in the world or the biggest story in human history. And he says, I think it's the latter. I said, it is. He says, we're going to do a series of town hall meetings with your witnesses, and we're going to do a huge expose on this. I said, I don't think ABC will let you. And he said, I'm the executive producer and I have final decision over this. I said, Ira, I don't think they'll let you, but I'll cooperate here. Here's 20 years of research and all this effort. You can have it on a silver platter. No payment. I'm not a consultant. I give everything away for free. So he goes back to New York. He takes me up there. There's Diane Sawyer and all these guys. Well, what's interesting? And I said, well, if you can make this happen, it's awesome. So a couple weeks later, he calls me up rather sheepishly. And he says, Dr. Greer, they're not going to let me do this story. And I said, well, Ira, I thought you said you had total control over programming for Primetime Live. He says, Dr. Greer, not for this. And I said, well, who are they? He says, Dr. Greer, you know who they are. And that was the end of it. And we've stayed in touch. He's now back with 60 Minutes. But that was one of the reasons why many of you may have remembered that Mike Wallace went on Larry King Live and had a deep depressive breakdown. And he talked about, he kept saying, I was a fraud, I'm a fraud. And part of it is that a guy named Schwartz, who was on the board of Time Life, and I met, and he was very good friends with Mike Wallace, and Mike Wallace had gotten a hold of a cache of these documents. And I was in New York at a party, and Bob Schwartz said to me, he says, look, he said, the media has become the scribe taking dictation from the right hand of the king, and particularly on something like this. And so Mike Wallace, who was this esteemed investigative reporter, couldn't touch the biggest investigative reporting story in history. And he felt like a total fraud and went into a deep depression over it. If you take Hollywood, the same thing happens. The only movies you really see that come out anymore, now Close Encounters of the Third Kind by Spielberg was a docudrama. He was given access to some of the secret files at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. That's true. If you haven't seen that movie, go see it. It's classic. But in modern times, that was in the 70s, I think, it just isn't possible. The studios are completely mobbed up with people, just like these scientists who actually are on the payroll, with people that respond to the intelligence community. So Arnold Kopelson was a huge producer, had multi-billion-dollar in gross sales for his movies, flew me out to L.A. He wanted to do an enormous expose, true life story, be like Argo, based on my work and what I've done. It'd be a thriller. You have murder, you have mayhem, you have intrigue, you have ET contact, you have the whole thing. He loved it. And he was there, and I was at 20th Century Fox, and he had a $60 million discretionary budget to do any movie he wanted, pre-approved, because he was a big name. And I said, well, Arnold, I think they're going to let you do this one. He says, oh, yes, I'm Arnold Kopelson, and I've done this. And he took me to his vanity wall of all his awards. I said, great, wonderful, give me a call. So he sends one of his chief assistants here to D.C. when we're doing the private closed briefings for members of Congress in April of 1997. And she goes back, and he goes below. He said, this is the most incredible bunch of information, because we filmed all that. And so I let him have that closed briefing film. He says, this is going to be the biggest movie. It'll be bigger than E.T. or Close Encounters or any of them. And certainly it'd be bigger than something like Avatar. I said, well, good, do it. So, but I don't know if they'll let you. He says, why do you say that? I said, well, let's see. Let's put it in, start it down the path and let's see what happens. A few weeks later, I get a call from Arnold Kopelson. He says, Dr. Greer, they won't let me do this movie. I said, oh, Arnold, I thought you had this $60 million already in the bank ready to roll. He says, not for this. Fox has killed it, put it in turnaround faster than 10 light years of light speed. So it went into turnaround and got killed. And turnaround means when you take a film and basically kill it. So that's what happened. And it's happened. I give you this example. If I'd be here until tomorrow morning giving you examples I've had with the media, the mainstream media, where this has happened over and over and over again. So one of the problems is the big media do not allow certain things to be exposed. And we have been brainwashed to think that we're the land of the free and have a free press and a free market, etc. But we do only within a certain confine. But ironically, that confine is a prison. Because how do you have a free market if the most important technologies and information of the last 100 years is sequestered and can't be used? I mean, that's not a free market. That's a managed market and controlled, and it is.